Hi everybody in Luqman Nation, it's Jackie Luqman, and today is Friday, July 27th, and I am just coming from our weekly Loud and Clear midterm roundup segment with Brian Becker and John Kiriakou. That's always a lot of fun to talk about what's going on in all of the midterm elections. It is not something that is focused on a whole lot by a lot of people online in the political universe that I noticed. So I think it's something that is really important that we do have to pay attention to. What's going on in these midterm races across the country in different states is very important, because as much as we focus on the presidential antics, and there are plenty of antics and shenanigans going on at the presidential level in the White House, what's going on in the states is in a lot of ways even more important, because those races directly impact people's lives pretty quickly. I mean, these are people who are setting policy at the state level that immediately and directly affect people's everyday lives. So I think that looking at state level politics is really important to any kind of political analysis. Not only is it really important, it's actually a lot of fun, because you get to see the different cultures in the different states and the different environments play out in the way the races are run, in the things the candidates say, in the way they run their campaigns, and in the way they are expressed, or in the way they end up polling. I mean, because polls, while we can quibble about the validity of a lot of polls, polls are really important if they are done correctly and if they're reputable. You can't pay attention to every poll because every poll isn't right, but polls are actually pretty important in the world of politics. So yeah, looking at politics on a state level, especially in the midterm races, really, really important. But I was really kind of struck by some of the comments made by some people, not just on my page, on our page, but that I see among a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot, some black activists who think that, we shouldn't get involved in politics. And I don't think that there is an age range where this attitude comes from. I've seen older people who have been in the struggle for a long time, and they see, oh my God, we've done all this, and why do we keep trying? And then I see that attitude coming from some younger people who haven't been in the struggle at all, and they think that there are things that we can do other than politics, and politics isn't for us. Listen, we say all the time here in Luqman Nation that politics affects everything. You can claim that you're apolitical all you want to, but I guarantee you politics has affected your life, whether you've been involved in politics or not, whether you have ever voted or not, whether you have ever paid attention to a politician or a campaign or a ballot measure. Politics has in some way affected your life. So we can sit here and declare that we don't want to be involved in politics, but politics is always involved with us. Always. From what our tax rate is, to what our district boundaries are where we live, to what services and amenities are included in those district boundaries, to who decides how much the police department is paid out of our taxes, and who determines how or whether police departments or police officers who violate the rights of the citizens in those neighborhood boundaries are punished. What schools are in the boundaries in our neighborhoods? If we live in a neighborhood that has a high concentration of apartment dwellers, where a lot of people do not own homes, so they don't pay property taxes, so those property taxes aren't making up the budget for public schools. So the budget for public schools are determined by what the city council decides those public schools get. Politics affect your life. So we were talking today about a race that I've been paying attention to, but I have not been giving the attention that it deserves. But we did finally talk about it today on Loud and Clear, and that's the gubernatorial race in Georgia. Now, Stacey Abrams, after a contentious primary against Democratic challenger Stacey Evans, and if you want a really great analysis on the Georgia gubernatorial race, the Democratic primary running up to it, check out The Way with Anoa. Our friend Anoa Changa. She is in Atlanta. She is just an amazing mind, and just fabulous on the ground with amazing commentary on a very important local race. Now, that race was important not just because we had a Democratic primary that pitted a highly qualified black woman against a highly qualified white woman, and there were all of these racial undertones, and then there was the issue from Netroots last year in which Stacey Evans had some snarky, snotty things to say about black activists at Netroots, challenging her position on some things. Again, Anoa gives a great analysis of that. But Stacey Abrams won the Democratic primary, this close to becoming the very first African-American female governor of the state of Georgia. But this is very important because her challenger, and this race is really important because her challenger is a Republican who just won the GOP primary, who I'm telling you is playing up the white racial grievance, resentment vote that Donald Trump won on. And the reason this particular midterm election is important is because I think it is the bellwether. It is the standard, if you will, for what this country is facing in regard to politics, not just now, but in the future. The Georgia race is like the litmus test for what this country is going to become politically, what we want to be politically. Are people in Georgia going to pick this clearly bombastic white guy who makes no bones about his anti-immigration stance, who makes no bones about his almost threatening Second Amendment views, to the point where in his campaign ad, he's talking about how much of a proponent of the Second Amendment he is, and he wishes if anybody would challenge him, they have to answer to him, and he is racking a shotgun in the campaign ad. This is the Republican challenger for the governorship in Georgia, who is going up against Stacey Abrams, a black woman who people wanted to make a big deal out of the fact that she has $200,000 in student loan debt. Like I said on Loud and Clear, Stacey Abrams having this much student loan debt, that doesn't make her that doesn't disqualify her from running for governor of Georgia. If anything, the fact that this woman did everything she was supposed to do, did everything that this country says you're supposed to do, and go get an education, and especially middle class black folks, that's what we told our kids. Look, go get that education so you get that good job. Hey, Sandy. Hey, Robin. Go get that education so you go get that good job and make that good money. And instead, what our kids got was $200,000 in student loan debt. Even with a so-called good job, the student loan debt far outpaces any income gains that degree might have benefited you. That's true of most kids who go to college in this country. That is particularly more true, disproportionately more true for black college students. So Stacey Abrams and her student loan debt isn't a disqualifier to run for governor. She is indicative of your average American college student. She's indicative of the problem in the system that needs to be changed by the leadership of somebody who's dealing with the problem. But America, and by America, I'm looking at Georgia as a microcosm, has to decide right now, in these midterms and in the next election, what kind of country are we going to continue to be? Are we going to continue to vote for politicians like this guy, Brian Kemp, this white grievance? I mean, the conservatives, Republicans have been whining about identity politics that black people have been peddling, and all we ever talk about are black people issues, and it's identity politics, and it's destroying the country, and it's dividing us. But this guy comes out with a campaign ad that plays upon every white grievance that Trump just won on. Too many immigrants coming into the country, and the immigrants are making America brown, and we need to stop that. So he's anti-immigration. Too much resistance to Second Amendment rights, and people want to take away our guns, and the liberals want to take away our guns so that they want to make us vulnerable to the criminals. So I'm a strong supporter of Second Amendment rights, and I'm going to rack my shotgun in its ad as a threat to anybody who would challenge my Second Amendment rights. And I'm not going to work across the aisle. I'm going to blow up the aisle that I have to work across, because he actually has a part in his ad where he says, oh, I'm willing to work across the aisle. And behind them, there's a little graphic of a little mini explosion, signifying that no, he's not going to work across the aisle. He's going to blow the aisle up. He is going to govern to address those specific white grievance issues that he talks about in his ad. And this is what Donald Trump won on. These are the things that the GOP has been fomenting among their base, the conservative, fundamental white Christians, the disaffected moderate Republicans, or even conservative Democrats who feel like the white way of life is being threatened by the brown people coming across the southern border, and the welfare cheats that all of the black people are committing, even though most of the people on welfare in this country are white. Most of the people committing welfare fraud are white. But it's this white grievance identity politics that this man, Brian Kemp, is playing on, and Georgia has to decide in November if they want to elect a governor who is going to implement a platform of keep Georgia white again, which is what Trump's platform of make America great again really is, or if they want to vote for a politician who they might be able to rely upon to bring about some change for the benefit of their lives in that country, in that state, in the form of Stacey Abrams. Is she entirely progressive? No. But I'm talking about in the context of a race in which we have clearly defined sides. We know who the candidates are, and the candidates are the psychopath, white grievance, identity politics. And I did say psychopath, I meant it. White grievance, identity politics, GOP candidate, or if it's Stacey Abrams, who, yes, is a Democrat, but she's more like you and me than that guy Brian Kemp is. So that's the choice the Democrats have in Georgia. And I'm not sitting here telling you should vote for Democrats, because I swear, y'all, we need to get away from these simplistic narratives when it comes to politics. We have said here in Luqman Nation the same thing. We've been really, really consistent with this ever since we started doing this online live prevaricating, whatever you want to call it, way back when we were with Real Progressives, way back in 2016. We told you then, listen, while we are not members of the Democratic Party anymore, if you feel like you need to vote for a Democrat, okay, fine. You just need to make sure you understand why you're voting for a Democrat, and you need to be careful what kind of Democrat you're voting for. You need to make sure that if you're going to vote for a Democrat, that Democrat had better be the type of politician who will listen to the criticism and the needs of the people. If that's not what that person is, if we're not talking about voting for Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, who have already done untold amounts of damage to marginalized people in their states as Democrats. Those aren't the type of Democrats we're talking about voting for. There are plenty of other Democrats out there who actually I wouldn't have a problem voting for, because I think they could be moved farther to the left on some issues. And they're far enough to the left where, okay, they could be of some real good, real immediate substantive change and improvement to people's lives on the state level. There are times when we have to divorce national politics from what's going on in the states, because when you look at these state races, you see some different things going on that are not reflected on the national level. And I see some people just hopped off because I'm like, oh, she said vote for Democrats. Okay. But the people in Georgia don't have a third-party option to choose from. They have Brian Kemp, who's the Republican, and Stacey Abrams, who's the Democrat. Stacey Abrams' policies are what we need to pay attention to, are what the voters of Georgia need to pay attention to. And again, like we talked about on Loud and Clear earlier, and we'll have a link for you later on this afternoon. I think we'll have a link for you to the Loud and Clear podcast later on this afternoon, but they'll actually air it. They'll actually air that segment on Sputnik Radio. You can get that online at Sputnik Radio at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. And you can listen on the radio at 105.5 FM. At 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time to hear that segment that we just recorded. But I'll also have a link later on. So the backstory that is critically important in this Georgia race, that is also an issue nationally with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and there needs to be a lesson taken by third parties, I don't care what the third party is that Stacey Abrams has been trying to build the voter base for the Democratic Party through voter registration drives, through getting people registered to vote, through getting people involved in the process. That's been her focus for years and years. But Brian Kemp has been her nemesis in that effort for years and years. Brian Kemp was actually responsible for purging the rolls, the voter rolls of thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of Georgia voters a while back. So all of the efforts that Stacey Abrams has been pushing to get people involved in the process, to get them registered to vote, to get them to the polls, Brian Kemp has been thwarting her at every turn. So now we're not just talking about a battle between a Republican and a Democrat. Now we're talking about a battle between people who don't want people who they know will not vote for them to even have access to their right to vote, and people who at the very least are trying to make sure everyone has access to their right to vote. And third party proponents, of which I am one, you can talk about how much better your policies are than the Democrats all you want to, but if you are not mobilizing people to be involved in the process, if you are not going into neighborhoods where there is high voter disenfranchisement and talking to those people and addressing the issues of voter disenfranchisement, you aren't going to have a voter base either. I mean, at the very least, with the Democratic Party's voter mobilization efforts, their registering voters, their get out the vote efforts, at least they put people on the rolls to vote for third parties to go talk to. If third parties aren't out there actually helping to get people registered to vote, what voter base are you building up? How can you criticize one of the major parties that's doing the foundational work to political activism, which is getting people registered to vote? Now, like we've said before, if you feel like either party or any politician isn't doing the job of political education, then okay, that's where you come in. Then that's where you do that. But I'm telling you, if you expect people to come out and vote for a third party without understanding that there is a massive effort at sustained and intentional voter disenfranchisement and suppression going on by the GOP and has been going on for decades, and they make no apologies about it. If you're not combating that, then all your efforts at telling people about how much better than the Democrats your policies are, really, they're not going to make much difference, because people who are disenfranchised from voting can't vote for anybody. So yes, while third parties should fight for ballot access for third party candidates, yes, and they should absolutely mobilize to go out there and talk to people in heavily Democratic districts to offer them viable alternatives. The very first question you need to ask is, hey, are you registered to vote? If you're not, how can we help you do that? Don't be mad at Stacey Abrams because that was a major component of her political career, of her political focus. She was doing her job as a politician. And honestly, she was doing her job as a member of an historically disenfranchised community in regard to voting and political access. Hey, Pam, how are you? And happy belated birthday. We try really hard not to tell people who to vote for here on Luqman Nation, because we don't want to be liable for anybody's disappointment. And there's so much disappointment in politics, isn't it? Isn't there so much disappointment in politics? You love a candidate, and then somebody shares some meme that claims that they said some ridiculous thing and your feelings are hurt because you found out they're not perfect. One thing we have learned in our own political maturity, our own journey of political maturity, is that you cannot put these people on pedestals. You can't put politicians on pedestals. Don't do that. Because they will disappoint you every single time. I promise you, if I ever run for office, I promise I'm going to do and say something that people are going to be like, I thought Jacqueline was sincere. I thought she was legit. Look, politics is a dirty, filthy game. Nobody gets out clean. Nobody. Nobody who stays in it gets everything they want. Nobody who makes a career out of it gets out of it all pristine. Everybody has to vote on some stuff that they have to hold their nose to vote on. But some are just more corrupt than others, and that's also true. So we have to look at politics on so many different levels, right? There's the national politics, which of course that affects all of us. Everybody in this country, and not only everybody in this country, but everybody in the world. The lack of international focus of the American voting population is kind of frightening. It really is kind of horrifying to me, especially as we're talking about this whole Russiagate foolishness, and people are actually just like, oh my God, Russia has tampered with our elections. But because we don't understand history and international politics and the role the United States government has played in the governments of other countries, we don't understand that a Russian president was elected directly because of American interference in Russian politics. And I do mean a team of political consultants was sent to Russia to wage a campaign in Russia to reform the image of Boris Yeltsin, who the Russian people hated and would never have reelected were it not for the direct interference. You can't even call it interference. The United States government managed the reelection campaign of Boris Yeltsin in 1994, and they got that man reelected. He did such an abysmal, horrible job in Russia that when the next election in Russia came around, you know who the Russians elected? Because they wanted to get away from the weak and ridiculously offensive and embarrassing puppet presidential tenure of Boris Yeltsin whose strings were pulled by the United States. You know who they elected? Vladimir Putin. But the lack of understanding, not even understanding, we don't even know these things. And it's not like this is something that is information that's printed in some, high-minded scholarly journal that none of us have access to. This was printed in Time magazine. Time magazine. You can Google U.S. Helps elect Yeltsin right now, and a cover of the Time magazine issue that this story was in from 1994 or 1996 will come up in your search. And it's a big old picture of Boris Yeltsin with his drunken self waving some American flags. So not understanding the history of the United States, not just meddling, not just influencing, but how about toppling? How about assassinating democratically elected leaders of foreign countries because we don't like what those leaders are doing in regard to their country's economic policies? And they didn't want to play ball with us. They didn't want to give us our kickback. These people didn't want to give us our taste. Like who you mean? How about like Muammar Gaddafi? Now, I understand Gaddafi was not a saint. I'm not saying at all that any of these people who are these world leaders were wonderful, fabulous leaders that did everything right. All governments lie. I.F. Stone reminds us of that. The great journalist I.F. Stone. All governments lie. So none of them are innocent. None of them are pure. But none of them deserve to be toppled by the United States. The largest, most wealthy superpower with the largest nuclear arsenal the second largest economy now, and the largest military in the world. Whatever Muammar Gaddafi's issues were in his country, what we do know is that he was a staunch Pan-Africanist. He was becoming a staunch Pan-Africanist, and he was about to establish a currency that was not based on the United States dollar, but was instead based on gold, which is in abundance in Africa, that was supposed to be the currency of the African Union. Well, the United States couldn't have that. A unified, economically stable, and possibly militarily viable African continent could never be allowed to happen, to challenge the Western hegemonic imperialist powers. So you know Muammar Gaddafi had to go. He was democratically elected in his country. There were absolute problems. We both know people, because we worked in the hotel industry, who were from Libya or around the area, and you know, we would be told by people, do you ever wonder why you never meet a lot of people from Libya? You know why? Because we never had to go anywhere for anything. We never had to leave Libya for anything. Education, jobs, good quality of life, it was all there. Gaddafi made sure that he provided for his people. Now, the one thing you couldn't do, really, if you didn't want to get in trouble with Gaddafi, was to challenge him politically. That's one thing you couldn't do. But if a family needed a home, Gaddafi made sure they had a home. Every family that was starting out with a child, the families had babies, Gaddafi gave them money to start their family. Somebody needed a job, he made sure they had a job. But those things, the internal corruptions of Muammar Gaddafi were never anything the United States felt threatened by. They didn't care because, I mean, we have our own internal corruptions. It was only when Gaddafi decided, you know what, we're Africans. We're Africans, and our brethren on this continent are suffering, and we're suffering because of the imperialist and especially the United States interventionism and regime change that we must stop. And no country was in a better position to be the catalyst for the modern Pan-Africanist movement and establishment of a true African Union than Libya. It was the most stable. It was the country with one of the most stable and growing economies in Africa. Of course, they had to be stopped. And the United States was behind that. Not only was the United States behind that, but let's be real, the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton were behind that. Just like they were with Honduras, just like they were with meddling in Haiti, just like this government was involved in trying to overthrow the Cuban government after the Cuban Revolution, just like this government has been involved in overthrowing the democratic elected governments in Iran, like we have been involved in coups in Egypt. So listen, this country and these misintelligence or these unintelligence agencies have all been complicit in the destabilization of governments around the world. So for anybody to sit there and claim that these people can be trusted in regard to Russia hacking the email server of a private organization that's not a government agency and having any influence whatsoever on our election, it's historically uninformed, and it's also illogical. It's a little teeny bit hysterical. I'm not at all saying that Russia wasn't involved in some kind of hacking somewhere. Of course they were, because we do it to them, and we do it to China, and China does it to us, and China does it to Russia, and Russia does it to China, and we do it to France and Germany. and Germany and France does it to us. Oh, please. It's foolish and juvenile and immature to think that world governments are not fiddling around in each other's stuff. Yes, they are. Of course they are. So it's not like a shock that, oh, Russia tried to hack into some database. Of course they are. Sure. Just like we hack into theirs. But this idea that Russia has influenced the outcome of this election without the understanding of what the accusations really are here, because even the misintelligence agencies, the unintelligence agencies, I like both of those terms. I can't make up my mind which one I want to use. Even the unintelligence agencies, in the reports they put out, they all say that even as they allege that Russia tried to make some type of intrusion into American electoral systems, these actions did not result in any kind of impact on the election. They say this in their reports. So I don't know why people are still claiming that Russia influenced our elections. They didn't. No, you know what influenced our election? American stupidity. That's what influenced our elections. The stupidity of the American voting population that actually believed the circus barker Donald Trump. Because he did what he has always done and played the media and spun this narrative of him being a success and him knowing what he was doing and him understanding policy and him wanting to be there for the American people, and people believed it and completely ignored all of the folks who said that man is a liar, a con artist, and he's pretty much a thief. Russia didn't hack the American elections. American voter ignorance hacked the American elections. And all these people who are blaming all these other groups of people for not showing up and not voting, how are you going to blame a group of people like black people? Because that's the narrative going around. Oh, black people didn't vote. That's why Hillary didn't win. How are you going to blame a group of people who have been ignored by the Democrats, who won't even as a national party? I'm not talking about state and local level politicians who might be out there trying to actually work for their constituents. I'm talking about a national party, the national platform of the National Democratic National Committee. Make it their business. It is their strategy to intentionally ignore black issues. They won't even talk about it. It was their strategy in the last campaign. We got those from the emails. Even if Russia did hack the emails on the DNC server, Vladimir Putin and none of those 12 Russian agents wrote those emails. Where one of the strategies were for the candidates, whoever they were, introduced on the campaign trail. You got a Democratic Party that is actively running on a strategy of ignoring black voters. But then y'all are going to turn around and blame the very people you ignored because your candidate didn't win? Well, are you crazy? So we've got a party that ignores us on one hand, and then we've got a party on the other hand, the GOP. There we go. All right. Now we got a signal back. Sorry about that, you guys. So we've got a Democratic Party on one hand that actively ignores us, black voters, I mean. And then on the other hand, you've got a Republican Party that actively works against us, actively tries to keep us out of the process. And you've got these two major parties doing that. Then you've got some third parties who also don't want to talk to black voters, who claim that black people who are looking for a different, an alternative from either party are being divisive when we talk specifically about black issues. And this is a problem within the Green Party. This has been a problem within other third party options. So you've got none of the parties who are willing without a lot of serious challenging to actually address the issues of a voter bloc that they continually demand we'd better vote for you, especially the Democrats, because the Democrats always come with, well, who are you going to vote for, the Republicans? And then you've got some in the Green Party, not all, because the Green Party is getting better with this, but you got some in the Green Party who will be real condescending and say, well, yes, our policies are better than the Democrats, but look, let's not talk about race because it's class, not race, when clearly racial issues are also class issues in this country. And y'all know the problems we even saw up front with our own eyes that the vice presidential candidate for the Green Party, Ajamu Baraka, had with so-called third-party supporters, progressive supporters last summer. You know, we saw that, and we talked to you about that, brought that to you firsthand. So you got people who are claiming that the Russians influenced the election, but they're not telling you the truth that nothing the Russians allegedly did actually influence the election. Then you've got people blaming black people who didn't vote for the reason Trump won, but they're not telling you that it wasn't that black people didn't vote, because most of the black people who voted actually voted for Hillary Clinton, for better or for worse. That's just the fact of the matter. But they're also not telling you that millions in the triple digits of white people who were registered Democrats did not vote, and the ridiculous percentage of white women who voted for sexist, misogynist, racist, Islamophobe Donald Trump. No, we don't talk about them. We're just sitting here talking about all the black people who we're blaming for giving us Donald Trump. And this is the kind of disconnect on a national level that black voters have to deal with from the Democratic Party, which kind of has us pissed off at you, Democrats. I mean, the reasons we're unhappy with the Republicans, that's pretty obvious. But if the Democrats really want to continue to win, if they really want to not just win, but to advocate for the people they keep bullying into voting for them just because we allegedly don't have another choice, then they're going to have to stop ignoring this voter base that they know they need. And third parties are going to have to reach out to this same voter base and give people reasons to vote for them other than we're not as corrupt as the Democrats. You got to meet people in politics. You've got to meet people where their political pain is. That's what you have to do. And in order to do that, you have to face the reality of what people's political pain really is. And that political pain is different for different groups of people to different extents. Yes, poor white people suffer too, but poor white people don't also suffer from discrimination that's based on race. So as much as poor white people have struggled and suffered from NAFTA and outsourcing jobs overseas and income inequality and the 1% causing wages to stay stagnant over the past 30 years, poor white people don't also have to face racial discrimination in hiring, finance, income, education. You cannot ignore those issues, because if you ignore those issues, you ignore those people. All right, thanks for nearly killing us, psycho driver. So much of driving in Washington, D.C. is contingent upon you paying attention to what other people are doing because there are so many people in this city now who are from so many different places, who have like the driving skills of people who are either dodging boulders or buggies, horse-drawn carriages. It's insane. But in conclusion, I just got to tell you that there is nothing that we do in this life. There's nothing we encounter in this life, in this world, that is not influenced and informed by politics. Nothing. Not a thing. So I don't care what kind of activist you call yourself. I don't care if you're, if you're a black person who is a strong Pan-Africanist and you are fighting for the liberation of your people like us. We understand that politics plays into all of this. If you are a feminist and you are advocating for the equality of women, politics influences what happens there. If you are an advocate for the poor, across the board, politics influences that. If you're an advocate, if you're an education advocate, a housing advocate, if you're an advocate for veterans, it doesn't matter what your economic advocacy focus is. You cannot get any kind of progress in anything unless you focus a part of your advocacy on political activism. We cannot ignore politics, ladies and gentlemen, because politics just doesn't ignore us. So, we're going to bring you what we think will be a very interesting live stream tomorrow afternoon. So stay tuned. And hey, please consider contributing to Luqman Nation to help us defray the costs of us going to Netroots in New Orleans next week, where we will be participating on a panel. Thank y'all very much. Luqman Nation on PayPal, GoFundMe, and Patreon. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week.